are you all tonight? Whew, I've been having a stressful evening. So I wasn't going to share this, but I guess I'm going to share it now because, hey, why not? I have been dealing with someone, y'all know about the person that I was dealing with here in Oklahoma. So they ran into some problems. Those problems ended up getting them incarcerated. These were problems that they had before they met me. And I don't know why I be meeting people when they're at these crossroads in their life. I always say I'm crossroads energy. But anyway, um, he had to go and do some time. Tomorrow he's facing his sentencing. And he's super stressed out right now. And sort of stressing me out. Because he's in a very difficult situation, um, he wants to vent that to me, and I think he just wants me to listen to him vent it. And so I think when he calls me, he's expecting for me to just sit up here and listen to him woe is me and beat himself up, and I'm like, am I putting money on your account for you to call me and give me woe is me? Um, I remember, back in the day when I used to go to jail, and I've never done any hard time. Like the longest that I've ever been incarcerated was for probably 104 days. The second longest time was probably for 75 days. And so, but if you add up all the time I've done, you could probably get a year. But I have never done any hard time per se, even though I did have a hard time while I was in jail because of my very progressed transition. I can remember when I would go to jail, I knew that I wasn't going to get any family support because the vibe was, for the most part, you put yourself in there, that's what you deserve, get it how you live. I knew that when I got out of jail, that I wasn't going to get any support. And so oftentimes I will go to jail for prostitution and have to come home and prostitute the very same day in order to get a roof over my head. Um, I never really, I could count on my hands the time that I received um, commissary support while I was incarcerated. So I just did not have any support, much support during those times. And so I have a very disenchanted um, relationship when it comes to um, Cry Me a River songs from grown ass men. When here it is, I'm living my life as a woman, living my life as a feminine being, and life has never truly been a box of chocolates. So, and then there's that. So let's start reading at page 11, Daddy Issues. So many people who understand what it means to be a black man or to be a man in general will say that your relationship with your father is one of the most important relationships you can build. My relationship with my father was interesting. Mark Queen Raymond was a Haitian African was a Haitian American black man, and I loved everything about him. I loved my father's beautiful locks. I loved my father's great style. I even loved how his weed smelled when he would ride around in his old beat up car. There was nothing about my dad that, like most people, couldn't be matched by any other dad in the world. He was amazing. My dad made me feel like I could conquer the world. He was a boxer and just a little over 5 feet 10 inches. But there was something safe about him. I constantly found safety in my father, even though he wasn't around because he and my mother couldn't bear to stand more than 5 minutes in a room with each other. When we did spend time together, it was always magical. My dad would come over every weekend or whenever my grandmother would get my mom out of the house long enough for him to take me somewhere. And we just went for a ride. Most of the time, I drug him to one of my favorite spots when I was younger, Burger King. I loved Burger King so much that he threatened that I would turn into a chicken sandwich one day, which was my favorite thing to eat, an original chicken sandwich, extra hot, heavy mayo, cut in half with onion rings instead of fries, and a Dr. Pepper with no ice. My dad knew my order like the back of his hand, and he also knew that if they had cheesecake limited edition, he had to get me at least two. It's always too sweet for his mouth, but it worked out just fine for mine. My dad wasn't perfect, and frequently I wondered why I couldn't go and live with him. But I knew one thing about Mark, and it was that he was never ashamed of me. Mark may have said something or done some things that put me in spaces primarily. Wait. Mark may have said something or done something that put me in spaces momentarily. And a lot of that might be because he wasn't my full time parent. But my dad never once gave me the impression that he wasn't proud to have me as a son. He even brought me my first Destiny Child album. Granted, I wish that I had made a better choice because I wished that I had made a better choice because I asked for an album of remixes instead of the actual album. However, as a black man in the hood, when your black son asks for a Destiny Child album titled Bootylicious, most fathers wouldn't think twice about buying it. However, my dad made sure that I had the album and that he got it to me no matter what. My mom happened to be at home when my father brought the album to my house, and things took a turn for the worst. I remember my dad came early that morning to ask me if there was anything that I wanted. And specifically in the back of my mind, I knew that I had to have that album. I ran downstairs. I jumped into his arms. My grandmother sat on the couch with my grandfather watching a movie while my dad and I talked. Ultimately, I would spit out what I wanted, and he told me that he would be back later with the album. By the time my father made it back, my grandmother was in the kitchen cooking. My grandfather had stepped out to get some supplies for the meal, and my mom had randomly made a trip back home to pick up whatever she needed before heading back out for the day. And for some reason, this was the worst timing possible. My dad knocked on the door, and there was something about his knock. There was something about his presence. I always knew when he was around, I could sense it. From the moment the knocks rang on the door, I knew it was my dad, and I knew this would be trouble for a couple of reasons. My mom and dad, once again, couldn't stand to look at each other for more than 5 minutes. And also, my dad was supporting the habit that my mom didn't encourage, which was me loving Beyonce, Destiny Child, and anything feminine in that way, in the way that I did. My dad was enabling me to become soft, and my mom didn't like it. My mom opened the door. You could cut the tension in the entire house with a knife. I remember hearing my dad say, "I'm just here to drop off this for my son." And my mom asked why. She repeatedly asked why he was there, as if he didn't just explain himself. And for the first time, I remember being upset that my dad was simply just trying to be there. He was just trying to be a part of my life, whatever way he could. And at the time, I felt like my mom was just difficult for no reason. I felt like she was selfish. She was keeping my dad away from me, and she had absolutely no reason to do so. Mm. But none of that matters because she was angry with him. And as long as she was mad, everyone else had to be too. I don't remember much of the conversation that led to the actual argument, but I do remember, however, but I do remember, however, hearing my CD crash against the pavement outside. I don't know who threw it. I don't know how it hit the floor. I just remember crying. I remember running back into my room and crying profusely. I remember that my mom never came upstairs to address it, even though I knew that she heard it. I know that she knew that I listened to the entire argument. I know that she knew that I heard her throw my CD against the floor. I know that she knew that I heard her ask why he bought me something like this, and she didn't care. What she didn't realize was that I cried myself to sleep. That was the first time, that was the first time that I wanted my dad. I wanted my dad to save me from everything. I wanted him to keep me from my masculinity. I wanted so badly to be like, I wanted him so badly to be like the white dad that I saw on television. Oh my goodness. I wanted him, I wanted so badly for him to explain to me why my existence had to be narrowed down into a cycle of never ending toxicity. I wanted my dad to make it make sense. And I wanted so badly to tell him that I wasn't his son. I wanted to express myself in a way that I knew would get me in trouble if I did it to my mother. Mm. But my dad made me feel safe. My daddy made me feel like a princess. Mm. And he did it without even trying. Everything that was feminine about me or off or made other men raise their eyebrows were things that made my father smile. He loved my ability to dance and perform. He loved the way I loved the stage as much as he did. And he loved the fact that I was so passionate about Beyonce. He never questioned why she was my favorite celebrity or why I spent so many hours learning choreography to her music videos. He only supported me as a performer, and quite frankly, when he could, he was the only person that would come to any of my performances or shows. My dad wasn't all good, but he wasn't all bad either. When I was about 13, I finally came out to my mother, and while the conversation wasn't the easiest and was sparked out of fear, the conversation that I subsequently had to have with my dad was a lot more lighthearted than I expected to be. I had heard so many stories about how black men were supposed to deal with homosexuality. I had heard so many stories about how masculinity would be policed by your father and he rejected it if it showed up in any other way than the ones that were already deemed acceptable. I was visiting my father over the weekend and I had already had the conversation with my stepmom, Amy, Amy, Amy. Amy was a Cuban woman with a fire engine with a fire engine for hair and these hazelnut brown eyes. She was almost as frail as what one would think a stereotypical librarian would be, if only that stereotypical librarian had been a stripper in a past life. She was my confidant. If I couldn't tell anyone else anything about me, I could tell Amy. She always reminded me that everything would be okay. She was always in my corner. And so, after telling her that I was gay, I remember the look of terror in her eyes when I said I wanted to tell my father. We both waited up until 2 in the morning. My dad was doing a studio session working on one of his latest mixtapes. Yes, I had one of those dads. My dad finally got home around 2:30 to find Amy and me sleeping on the couch with Dave the Barbarian playing in the background. He seemed tired, but for some reason he mustered enough strength to smile and hug me and ask me what I was doing up. I told him that I needed to talk to him, and it was as if he already knew what I was going to say. My dad sat on the couch next to me and a sleeping version of Amy and told me that he loved me no matter what I was, who I was, or how I loved. And that and that if I was going to say to him I was gay, I didn't need to make a big announcement of it. My dad became a little more of my hero that day. My dad was a weekend parent who knew very little about the entirety of my existence or experience, but the one thing that he did know was that he didn't want to jeopardize what it meant to be in my life and have access to me stripped away based on his understanding of what masculinity was supposed to be. My dad knew that accepting me meant more than rejecting the idea of who I was going to be as a person. And he was willing to support that beyond his thoughts. He was ready to help me. Hmm. So, I think this resonates with me in the sense that I had three dads, and all three of my daddies were Geminis. My stepdaddy, the man who was there for me and um, acted as my father, um, and believed that he biologically created me with my mother. And then there's my biological father who planted the seed but was not there until um, I was getting ready to have my sex change. Um, my stepdad, my grandfather, who was my stepdad, he taught me a lot. He used to take me hunting we used to go fishing together, and he could cook his butt off. Like my daddy could cook. My stepdaddy could cook, and he wanted me to learn how to clean fish and clean animals. And um, I don't know. I think if it was presented to me in a different way, I probably would have been more open to do it. I convinced myself that the reason why I never got into cleaning animals or cleaning fish is because I thought it was barbaric. But I think that, I've eaten a lot of animals, and sometimes I'm disappointed in myself for not having a relationship with my food. Just um, I don't think that it's barbaric to raise animals, and to swiftly slaughter them so that you could eat them if that is what you're breeding them for the purpose of. As long as it's done thoughtfully and lovingly, because at the end of the day, something will always have to die for us to eat, for us to live. For anything, something that is living will always require the life force of another thing. And so I just think that it was the way that the information was presented to me. I think that my stepdad, because he wasn't a big man, he wasn't, a tall man, he was a short man. And I think that having a gun in his hand gave him a sense of power and a sense of might. And I think that, the culture was that, I have a gun, I'm a man, I'm superior. And I just think that if it could have been communicated to me in a way that showed compassion for nature, that showed a connection to nature, I think that I think that I could have been more comfortable with, you know, um, swiftly killing animals and thoughtfully, lovingly, saying some words over them, and, communing with this meal in a way that was, thoughtful. But I just don't feel like it was packaged in that way. And I feel like um, there are ancestors who had that capacity. I just don't think that my stepdad had that capacity, and I think that because he lacked that capacity, I think that I shied away from what he was trying to teach me and the things that he could teach me. Um, I rejected what he was trying to teach me, and it created a rift in between us. And as my feminine behavior, or my feminine expression became more pronounced, um, the distance, it increased between us, and he started to be violent to me and physically violent to me, um, because he was hurt by me rejecting what he was trying to teach me, you know. Um, and then there was the father who believed that he had helped to biologically create me, and he, in his mind, he struggles even to this day with the fact that I chose the path of my foremothers, that I lean more towards the women in my family, that I I resonate more with them. He it's always affected his ego because he's a man's man. He's respected by everybody. Everybody, holds him at high regard. No matter how many problematic things this guy has done, everybody loves him and holds him to such a high standard. He has so much respect in the town where I grew up, and I love that about him. He has saved me, and so many times he stood up for me. He's been there for me. giving me advice, made me feel loved when he was able to be there. Cause he was he was in the streets when I was younger, so he used to go to prison a lot, and that leads me to my biological father, who lives here in Oklahoma, and is in and out of jail. Has been in was in and out of jail, and had a very difficult time with drug usage, you know. But when I met him, because I said this before I met him, and this is what connects me with Hope's story. I always believed, and this doesn't go for every girl. This doesn't go for every girl. And I'm not judging your father and I'm not putting your father down. Um, I'm simply telling you about mine. With everything that has been, that society could say is wrong with my father, addiction, in and out of prison, being in the streets, chasing after women, womanizing, all those things, you could say that about him. But when he met me, he immediately referred to me with the proper pronouns and he embraced me as his daughter. And I always knew within my soul that the man who helped to create me couldn't deny his own seed. He could not deny his contribution to my being. And he would never be ashamed of something that he helped to create. I always felt that in my heart. And so sometimes I get frustrated with my father for choices that he's made. Um, and I think I get more frustrated with him for choices that he's made than he does with me for choices I've made. Um, a lot of times they say is, your dad is ashamed of you because you're trans. Sometimes I find myself um, having awkward feelings about my father because of his life choices. And so I wouldn't call that a privilege or a luxury. It's just a reality. Um, when my stepdad, the one who I lived with for a while, one day he beat me so bad on school picture days that I went to school with a black eye. And I never forget when I got to school, the principals called me into the office. They looked at my eye. And because my grandmother worked at the school that I was going to, they called her into the office when I wasn't in there. And they had a talk with her that went something to the tune of this. You have a choice. You can go home and you can put that man out, or the state can come and take your child. One or the other. Either he gotta go or he gotta go. And the other he they was talking about was me. I think that's the reason why I lean more to my mother's side. I think that's the reason why, despite everything that happened to me, I lean more towards my mother. I lean more towards my mother's. I saw a lot of strength in them. And when it came down to it, she chose me. She could have let that man stay in her house. She could have went back home to him and stayed with him. And she could have let the state take me. But she chose me. And that's probably why so many times I have chosen the women in my life. Because most of the time they've chosen me. And I struggle with my relationship with my fathers because I had one father who was abusing me because I rejected what he was trying to teach me. I had another father who just couldn't believe that I wasn't a man's man. I wasn't headed to be that. How can I be his genes or his DNA and I'm not fixing to be an alpha man like him? And then I had another daddy who had missed so much of my life, left me with so many questions about myself, so many things that I didn't understand. And once I met him, they all made sense. Biology is important because biology is what makes things make sense. You know, and there were things that I did and behaviors that I expressed and 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 ways in which I maneuvered that could only be explained by meeting my father. There were things about my DNA that could only be explained by meeting my father, you know. And I remember when my stepdad got ready to leave this earth, um, my grandmother wanted me to go to the hospital and see him because she wanted him to have peace, you know. And he wouldn't have been able to get peace if I wasn't willing to go to the hospital and hear him, you know. And I didn't want to go. I told her no. I said I'm not going. I made up in my mind I wasn't going. He had hurt me. I didn't want to forgive him. I wanted to hold on to that pain, and I wanted to forever hate him in my mind. But my grandmother has always been very important to me, and so if she asks me to do something, I try my best to do it. And so she asked me to go and see him when he was on his deathbed. The one who, took me hunting and fishing and things. And that was the best conversation we ever had. It's the best conversation we ever had. And I had already started to transition, so I was sitting before him looking like a girl. I had already started taking hormones and everything. And I think about him from time to time now. And I wish things would have went different. I wish that I would have been able to receive what he was trying to teach me. And I wish he would have had the capacity to teach it to me in a way that I could have connected with. I think patriarchy has cost a lot of beings who were born with penises and identified with the construct of manhood and identified with the construct of patriarchy. I've been following Dane Calloway, and he's not he's not being direct about what he's teaching, but he's revealing a lot of images of the original people of Turtle Island. And I think Turtle Island was a matriarch. I think that Turtle Island was guided by black femininity. And I think that's why This out of Africa narrative is a distraction because it's keeping us from focusing on what was going on here before the colonizer came. I think that I've read things and I've researched things about our male ancestors going into the woods with the colonizer to plot on the matriarch. Now, I'm not going to say that the matriarch was perfect and um, maybe they didn't have it coming. I don't know. I wasn't there. I don't know what what type of society we was when this was a matriarch. But I'm beginning to believe that we were a matriarch and that feminine beings who were born with wombs and those who likened themselves or resonated with that energy, with the divine feminine, were highly respected. And I think that perhaps some of the matriarchs were egotistical. Some of the matriarchs were not trusting. Some of the matriarchs did not allow space for these male beings um, to be stronger leaders, to be to have the space to era to I, maybe they weren't giving them enough grace. Maybe they because you can see it now in society. You can see it now, like the high level in which even with the conversation that's going on with Tyler Perry, like they dragging him, and y'all know how I feel about Tyler Perry. But like I think that there was a lot of I think that the men were probably worker bees. I think that during this matriarch, the men were probably worker bees, and I think that the women were warriors. I think that the women or the feminine beings were the guides and the royals and the chiefs, and I think that the colonizer does what they do still to this day. We talk, I was just conversing with somebody today. Um, they were saying how the industry is targeting our youth. And I'm like, but that's what America is. It's an industry, it's a corporation. That's what it's always been. And when you are going to target an opponent or target an adversary, who's the most who's more vulnerable than children? They teach us this in all these stories. The Pied Piper, which is incidentally what R. Kelly called himself. The Pied Piper, Hansel and Gretel. They lured into the house, and the children would get fattened up till they get eaten. The Little Red Riding Hood, who's the wolf disguised itself as family, as a loved one, so it could eat people. And so, in all of these children's stories, though in Hansel and Gretel, the witch is the machine. In the Pied Piper, the witch is the government, the machine, massa. In the Little Red Riding Hood, the wolf is the machine, massa, the oppressor. And so the machine is always going to go after the most vulnerable, the most curious, ones who don't know themselves. So, as I told him, this is nothing new. And we always say, oh, things need to go back to where they used to be. Things need to go back to the way they was when we was, a child stayed in the child's place and the child didn't do blah, blah, whoop, whoop, whoop. What is going on now is the fruits of that logic. That's what's going on now. Everything that's happening now is the fruits of that logic. And so, um, parent If you break the word down, it's a pair renting. You're renting these ancestors who've come to you through you coming together and putting that key inside that door and opening that door and bringing an ancestor here. The phallus is the key. The yoni is the door. You put the key in the door. You opened it, and you brought another ancestor here for you to guide, not for you to turn into a slave or cattle or make it do everything that you said do simply because you brought it here. And a lot of times, our ancestors have, I think, where we failed and where we folly was blackness is supposed to create this space for everything in moderation. It's supposed to have patience and capacity and the ability to absorb all of these things, all of these things that are potentially, that can potentially be dangerous. But if we create that space, let me give you a prime example. I was telling my uncle this the other day on the phone. When I was little, me and my best friend Bunky, we went and got cigarettes butts and we gathered them out of the churchyard. And we sat under the house and we smoked cigarette butts all evening. We sat under the house like Indian chiefs. And we was puffing on them cigarette butts because we saw older children smoking cigarette butts who were being influenced by, of course, mainstream and media, because cigarettes used to be a big thing. You'd always see cigarette ads and cigarette commercials. So we saw the older children smoking cigarettes who were already being influenced by the machine, and we wanted to smoke cigarettes because we saw the older children smoking it, so we thought it was cool. So we're under the house puffing on the cigarettes. After we finished puffing, I went home and told my grandmother that I had been smoking cigarettes all day with my best friend Bunky under the house. I never forget my grandmother said, "So how did it make you feel?" I said, "I didn't like it." I said, "My throat hurt." I said, "I don't." I said, "Oh, they was nasty. I don't know why I kept smoking them." Okay, so how you feel now? I feel better. I feel better that I told you about it. So you think you and Bunky y'all gonna smoke cigarettes again? No, no. You wanna go and get some ice cream? And we went to go and get the ice cream. And I never touched a cigarette again until I was like 18 years old. Now, had she fussed at me, condemned me, degraded me, I probably would have continued to smoke just out of a spirit of rebellion. But it was the approach. She created a safe space for me to be honest and talk about my experience without condemning me. And I was able to work through that without shame and decide for myself that I didn't want to do it again. And I think that's where we've lost as Black Indigenous people. And I think maybe that was what was happening in the matriarch. I think that because there is a such thing as black girl magic. There is I believe that I was watching this video of this woman today and she was dancing and she had these big old arms and she was big up top and little at the bottom. And in the comment section, they were joking saying that she looked like the Incredible Hulk, but she could dance her ass off. But when I saw the Incredible Hulk jokes in the comment section, I didn't I didn't even laugh because the black woman is the blueprint. So there's no shape or form that this being cannot come in. There's no form that XX cannot take on. Now, XY needs a little help with certain things, but you could find an XX born with barely no titties, big shoulders, a beard. You're more likely to see XX in so many different forms without having to take any testosterone or nothing. XX is literally the blueprint. And so when people crack jokes about XX looking masculine, I'm like, but it makes sense. It's the blueprint. So I didn't so XX having this understanding of itself, I could see a time where it was super egotistical, where it felt like it knew everything, and it felt like if you was born with a penis, you're the worker bee. You're the pack mule. Know your place. And um, even more controlling when it came to the children. I could see XX becoming so full of itself that it was sitting in a seat of self righteousness, condemning everything. And so those beings that felt inferior to XX started conspiring, participated in a coup, met in the woods, and talked to the colonizer, talked to the oppressor, and decided how they was going to betray the matriarch. See, they're not telling us the whole story about the Indians. They're not telling us that the Indians was dark skinned. They're not telling us that all of the people that look like me did not come over here on slave ships. They lying to us about so much stuff, and I think that's just a small part. I think it's all a lie. I think this was once a matriarch. And that is why now it is so important to get black women in alignment with patriarchy. And this is why Kamala Harris might win. Because it's the illusion that we're returning to a matriarch. But is it really that? When XX has been so indoctrinated by patriarchy's strategies, by patriarchy's belief, by patriarchy's mindset, when XX has been saturated and inundated in a way in which they process information and lean into logic and lean into using only 10% of our brain. So, would a matriarchy really be a matriarchy at this point? Anyway, the next chapter that we will read from Hope's book, tonight we read Daddy Issues, and it brought up some good things. Thank you, Hope. The next one will be Trade, the Silent Arrangement. That's what we're going to read next. The candle is lit. The candle of knowingness. Purple represents knowingness, spiritual awareness, and divinity. We light this candle to guide home the ancestors who've transitioned this realm on this day. Whether that transition is physical or spiritual, we acknowledge you. Whether you are just changing from one station in your being to the next, we acknowledge the ancestors who have come on this day, the ancestors who are here and have been here, and the ancestors who are coming. This candle acknowledges the Trinity, past, present, and future. As above, so below. As within, so without. As above, so below. As within, so without. As above, so below. As within, so without. Thank you, God, Goddess. Thank you, God, Goddess. A man, a woman, Lelim, Layla. Good night.